From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast.
The fastest growing entertainment phenomenon of this generation.
I, Prophet of Esports, joined today by my friend and co-host William Collis.
Yeah, we got the book of esports out. It's a big deal.
So everyone knows me as the Prophet and William as the Professor.
The Business of Esports podcast is sponsored by Esports Entertainment Group, a leading esports and online gambling company. For more information, go check them out at esportsentertainmentgroup.com. From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast. I am Paul Dewalibi. I'm joined today by my friends and co-host William Collis and Jimmy Barada. For those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome to the official podcast of esports. What we do here is we cover the most pressing gaming and esports topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze everything happening in this industry. For our regular listeners, thank you guys for tuning in every week. Thank you for all the love you show the podcast, the 5-star ratings and reviews, telling your friends and colleagues about the podcast. We really appreciate it. This is how it's grown. If you haven't already, please do me a favor. Go rate William's book on Amazon. Go rate the Book of Esports. Give him a 5-star rating on Amazon. Tell him how much you love the book. It's an amazing read. The first page especially, but go give William some love on Amazon. And if you haven't bought it already, go buy it because, like I said, it's a must read. If you are in the industry or you're working even adjacent to the industry, you have to go read the Book of Esports. William, how you doing today? Jimmy, how you guys doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm great, Paul. I'm always great. Jimmy, I want to know how you're doing.
I'm terrible. I woke up with pink eye today. Thank God this is a podcast, so no one can see this.
Well, we do video. You know this.
Why, Jimmy? What an effective way of reminding our podcast-only listeners that there is video paired with every podcast available on Business of Esports YouTube.
I'm not sure if that's the best way to remind them of that, William, but it's definitely a reason to listen to this podcast and not watch it.
Also a reminder to wash your hands, especially when playing with your baby niece, because this is what happens.
blaming the kids, I see. I will say, guys, I am especially excited this week. We have this week on the podcast, I will call family here. Part of the Business of Esports family for sure. We have none other than Nicole Pike. Nicole is the global sector head of esports and gaming for YouGov. Everyone knows they're the research partner for the Business of Esports. They're very good friends of ours. She has a passion for bringing trusted, nuanced data to stakeholders across the esports and gaming ecosystem. YouGov, like I said, is an incredible partner for the Business of Esports, and we really appreciate having them. Nicole, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. I'm super excited.
Nicole, for those of literally, because I know you are so well known in the industry, obviously YouGov is such a huge brand in the industry, but for the people maybe who don't know you or don't know about YouGov, would love if you could introduce yourself, some of your background, maybe what you did before you got into gaming, what you did before YouGov, and what you spend your time on at YouGov today.
Yeah, for sure. So my career journey started with pet food. So I'm happy to say that I've made a tremendous upgrade since my early research days. So the majority of my career was actually spent at Nielsen, which is where I was all the way up to moving over here to YouGov. And that was about just a little over a year ago. So just celebrated my 1-year anniversary at YouGov. But yeah, started on like classical consumer research at Nielsen for a major pet food client, and very quickly decided that I could not test basically pet owners' opinions of whether their dog liked a food or not for the rest of my life. The disconnect of who's purchasing versus who's the consumer is just bizarre in pet food land. So quickly said, you know what, Nielsen's a big company. Let me find something else that's more interesting. And started in this team that was basically looking at all the different parts of, the entertainment industry that we could apply some of our same research techniques. So I did everything from, I ran a forecast for AT&T on the first ever iPhone, which was like 2007 or something like that. Right. So we did that. I kind of helped to test a model for predicting box office sales. Like, we were throwing everything at the wall. And this was around the time that the Wii had come out. And, all of a sudden the gaming industry was like, whoa, we can't just do focus groups of like 17-year-old kids asking them what they want the next game to be like, because there's all these gamers that we didn't even know liked video games who are now entering the industry, and we have no idea what they want to play or who they are, and we need to talk to them. So it was really good timing for us, who had the ability to do a lot of like survey-based research with consumers, to move pretty rapidly into the gaming space to help bring some of the classic research that CPG companies had been doing for decades into an industry that was still fairly nascent when it came to research. So started there doing just a lot of more on like the publisher, console manufacturer side, working for a lot of endemic gaming companies on new product launches that they had coming out and that sort of thing. And did that for a long time at Nielsen. And then esports started to pop on the radar. Our clients were asking us, do you have any data on this? Do you know how to figure out if a game can be a good esport? And it's like, well, maybe that's your department, game publisher. So like, basically like, tell us what these people want. This kind of came out of nowhere. And so we, as Nielsen, took a look at the business and said, you know what, there isn't a lot of data out there. And especially the data that was out there was very just gaming and esports specific. And so there wasn't a great way to put what was happening in the industry into an accurate context with sports, with movies, with music, other forms of entertainment, basically, being able to just have a clear comparison of how big this really was, how it's growing. And so we said, you know what, we can do this. We know how to measure audiences. We know how to talk to fans. Like this is a great spot for Nielsen. And so that was 2016 where we formed our esports practice area. And that's really where I got very involved with a lot of things and people in the industry, obviously working with a lot of clients on measurement. And really the big pet project that I supported across the industry was coming up with the average minute audience metric. So had a really big task force across publishers, broadcasters, platforms, you name it. And we all kind of aligned on, okay, we need to be able to talk about esports viewership in a way that a brand can compare that to the NBA finals accurately, not with some, fake numbers. Right. So really made a huge industry push for that, which was super exciting. And did a lot of great work and research there at Nielsen. And then just realized that there was so much more that esports still needed to get to the level and granularity of data that like the sports world had. A sports team could go to 6 different companies, including YouGov, and say, okay, I want to know what percent of people who are fans of my team in my DMA ate at a fast food restaurant last week. And like, that was pretty relatively available in some way, shape, or form. If an esports team would have asked the same question, people would be like, I can tell you what general esports fans like, very, very generic. And that's when you're a brand trying to make a decision between the 10 different proposals you're getting from across the esports industry wanting your money. And they're all just talking about general esports fans, like, how do you know who to go with? It was a really big blocker I saw for brands being able to make smart decisions and for rights holders and teams to be able to kind of talk about who their fans were in a more relatable way. So long and the short, YouGov has great tools and capabilities and panels, which I'm sure we'll talk about during all of this. And I saw an opportunity to take what already existed and was established and what some great people on our sports business had done, including many that I worked with at Nielsen, and just make it for esports and gaming. So moved over to do that, and here I am today.
Very cool. I mean, it's an incredible story. Also, the average minute audience thing. Like when I saw that, to me, that was one of the major sort of not problems, but like things that needed to be fixed about the esports industry in terms of consistency around measurement. But I think what I love most about the data, at least that, because we get data from YouGov, and for those of you who are listening to the podcast, you guys should come check out the live stream we do every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern time, because we bring a lot of the YouGov data into the live stream and we have whole discussions around it. But
it's
I think
actually really just jumping on that. It's really good. Like there's a lot of things that you don't expect about esports to hold true, or things that you think are true that just aren't. And the data is really fun to dig into because there's so many preconceptions about this industry based on like, oh, I saw somebody run a commercial once, so that's popular, or like, oh, I was at an event and I remember a banner, so that must be a big thing. And it's actually really fun to see how the data squares with your intuition, because a lot of times it doesn't actually align. Sorry, just jumping. It's really good stuff.
No, and we love like listening to you guys talking about it, and some people on our side will be like, did you hear like they were asking questions about the data? I'm like, that's good, people are talking about it. Like that's we can't have a conversation about what the state of things is if there's not like that foundational thing to react to. So yeah.
But I think what's unique about it also is just the audience measurement stuff is obviously interesting, right? Like how many people spent how much time watching League of Legends or whatever, right? That is always interesting. I think what I love, especially about some of the data that we get from YouGov and highlight on the live stream, is it's data that you can use, that businesses can use to make decisions, right? And I feel like in the life cycle of the industry where we're at, we're sort of getting past the point of like, esports is novel, so I'm a brand, let me throw money at it however I like, doesn't really matter how we're testing this. I think it's getting to a level of sophistication now where the kinds of data that you guys pull out becomes necessary to make those decisions. I don't know if you guys think of your product in that way, Nicole, or if like I guess what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way is it feels a little bit like it comes before the decision rather being a measurement after the decision. Yeah, which I think is quite unique.
100%, and really just continues, the whole tenet of YouGov and what we do and how we collect our data is a continuous collection. So it can be a pre, and then you can use the same metrics and KPIs once a partnership is signed to then look at how those change and, ideally improve and build as a partnership develops. But yeah, absolutely. I think there's a ton of utility in that kind of decision making side of things, both for brands and for actual esports organizations. We have clients who will use our data just to determine what type of brands to talk to. A lot of esports organizations in the early days, it was like, all right, let's make a list of all the companies with big budgets and start going after them. And it's like, but how do you know that that's actually going to be good for your fans and a good fit for, your culture? And, obviously you can have conversations with brand managers and things like that, but some of that can actually be uncovered with data. And you see a huge delta in a particular category or brand that gives you as a rights holder this confidence to say, okay, like this really has something that could resonate with our fans. And then it gives you the ammo to go into a brand and say, this is why you should be here. And brands really, take that seriously and value it. And that's what they get out of the sports pitches that they, have seen traditionally too. So it's starting to become more and more. Esports prices are increasing. It's commanding a higher premium. So it's no longer kind of building off what you said earlier, Paul, it's no longer esports, the price is great because it's early. So it doesn't really matter what we do. We're not going to get a return. Like that doesn't happen anymore in most cases. So you're being asked to put up big budgets. You need to really be sure you're making smart decisions of where to spend them.
I think it's really intuitive, because as someone that spent a lot of time relating esports to non-endemic brands and entertainers, I spent most of my time with these flashy headlines and comparisons that were weak at best. And I see YouGov's data as just like so specific and really like what I was looking for all along, right? Because like for example, the comparison to the NBA and the NFL that we talked about on the live show last week that we
Yeah.
all had so much fun
Which
with.
you guys should check out, by the way. Everyone listening should go watch that show because it was really awesome.
That was
Great
actually an
discussion.
incredible like teaser. There's a lot of areas where esports
Yeah.
indexes very differently and very compellingly than traditional sports. It's actually like pretty weird, but pretty amazing.
Yeah, but I was 2 years ago talking with athletes, with artists, and trying to compare it, and now I actually have the data to support it. Thanks to I think your foresight. So I'm really interested to see where else you're taking it, because it really seemed to have taken, I think, the analysis and understanding of esports from this hype, like Paul was talking about, to really something again intuitive that the business professional can actually leverage, like you said as well, Nicole, to the big brands, the direct comparisons, and something with substance, not a eye-catching headline, but again something that we can actually use. It's been great.
Oh, well, thank you. That's great to hear.
Nicole, I have kind of a tough question here. On the podcast, I've been very critical of I would say there are groups within the esports industry that, make big claims, right? There's a lot of hype, and it's things like our content is, shown in airports, and there's 1 billion people who pass through the airports. Therefore, 1 billion people watch our content, right? You get a lot of this, like, I'll call it some fudging of the numbers to make, some of these things seem bigger than they are. And I always felt like they not preyed is maybe too strong a word, but they preyed on sort of the lack of transparency to be able to sell a product. Do you find that you ever get friction from customers or potential customers who buy your data, use your data, that are worried that now sort of the total transparency that YouGov brings and the hard data that YouGov brings may dampen sort of their ability to go and exaggerate some of those things? Or is it just welcomed with open arms? Like, I'm just curious from an industry perspective, is there friction to sort of knowing what's real and what's not, or is it welcomed?
It's a great question, and it's kind of a layered answer, I think. I think in one sense, our data and the depth that it has, and kind of how it can drill down deeply into just different ways that people respond to and engage with esports and gaming, actually has helped that argument in some ways, because I think without data to be able to prove otherwise, like all anyone had were the numbers from their social following, or the number, like the very easy to get numbers, and everyone just looked for the highest number to put out. I was talking to a very major CPG brand, and he said, every deck that I get from an esports team claims that they have the highest social following in the world. Like literally every single one, because everyone's just making up the numbers and they don't have anyone else's numbers. So they're like, oh yeah, brand manager won't know any different. Well, brand manager does when he sees that repeated 10 times. But the flip side is, what other data do they have to work with, right? So this, what we're doing, and a lot of the data that we're putting out allows them to find whatever that real story is for their fan base. And for most, it's not going to be that your team has the highest reach. Not only one can have the highest reach, but we all know that esports fans are valuable in different ways. And one of the biggest is the engagement and the passion for the space, how much they connect to gaming and their personal connection to that, to interacting with esports entities, and all of that is kind of that sentiment data. We're capturing those sorts of things. So then they actually have the numbers behind that, instead of just saying, oh, our fan base is the best. Like, they're great. They'll love you. Just invest with us. We can now hand them data to show exactly what that is. So it actually helps in many ways to move people away from that. Now, that being said, I've definitely had, both in my time at Nielsen and at YouGov, organizations that have said, I actually am not going to buy your data because I know it will either, number one, make me look smaller than people think I am, or number two, show that I shouldn't be charging as much as I am. And I can get the premium, so why not? And in some ways, maybe that's right. But in my opinion, isn't it good to, even just as a rights holder or a team, know your value and know where your baseline is? And then if people want to pay more, great, well done.
It's not sustainable, right?
Right.
You can, that might make sense for a year or two, but no CPG brand is going to continue to dump marketing dollars into
Right.
an underperforming channel year after year and be like, oh, but like they said it's going to perform. So
Yes, definitely a little short-sighted there. But that's, I'm open to having those conversations. And again, I think at the end of the day, like I don't want to make it sound like sneaky, like we can always find an angle, but in esports, there is often a really good story that you can find that will resonate with a brand who also doesn't want the highest reach team or event or whatever. They're looking for something smaller where they can make a good connection. And so that's kind of the other piece of things too, right? As more and more brands get into the space, you're not just looking to match the biggest brands in the world with the biggest esports groups in the world. There's so much more underneath that is beneficial for everyone, but the value comes from something other than just reach.
The analogy I think about here, and tell me if this is fair, but I always think like it's like if every NFL team was like, we have the highest social media reach, so you should advertise with us, right? Like you'd say like patently that's silly. There's all sorts of reasons. Like first of all, obviously only one has it, so whatever, that's crazy. But second of all, like no, like I know, there's all sorts of reasons to different NFL teams. The most obvious is geography, right? But there's also the identity of the fan bases. There's the history of the franchise. There's the regional preferences that they capture. Like, so yeah, I would, there's no way that would be how, if I got a deck from an NFL team and that was how they were marketing themselves, I'd be like, guys, you could do so much better. So, why is it such a reach to believe that esports shouldn't be the same diversified, nuanced landscape? Because it is.
Yeah. And I mean, that kind of some of those early days of some of those pitch decks that I either saw or that brands would tell me about did esports a little bit of a disservice because people could see through it. It was really interesting at being at Nielsen and kind of starting the practice area. It kind of went from people, these big comparisons of NBA versus esports or the World Series or Super Bowl. The conversation started as people coming to me and saying like, okay, is this really true? And kind of asking about it. About a year and a half later, all the brands coming to me were saying, we know this cannot be true. So what's the real, right? Like it was very quickly this like, okay, we've called BS on the industry. So we need someone to tell us what's accurate.
So you probably can't answer this, but just because we've danced around it, I feel like our viewers would be mad if I didn't ask, like, which team does have the highest social media reach? I know you guys know. Can you share that? But like we should, if you can share it, we should tell people.
So here's my answer to that. And it actually is this. The answer is that I have this pie in the sky idea for the perfect metric that if someone can figure out how to do it someday, it's going to be amazing. And it's what everyone should base everything off of, which is the average number of touch points with anything related to your property that your average fan has a week. And if you think about it, that's really hard to calculate because all of the metrics around, social, you can look at Twitter and see how many people are following a team on Twitter, but how do you know how many of those overlap with who's following them on Instagram? And so really knowing, I've had teams just add them all up and literally be like, okay, according to our socials, this is a quote, according to our socials, every person in the world has interacted with our team 3 times. I'm like, well, that's not accurate. Like, that right there should tell you that wasn't the right way to do it. But to me, that is a really cool metric because one of the things that I consistently see and in talking to previous clients on the sports side that esports always kind of excels at is how engaged fans are in between match day. Like sports, people get really excited when there's a game coming up, like a couple hours before. They want to talk about who's on the roster, who's injured, whatever. And then a couple hours after, you see the cool highlights, you see dunks, whatever, touchdowns, and then everyone goes about their business. Football, Sunday, everyone loves football on Sunday, and then they forget it until maybe Thursday night football, right? Esports, there's the amount of appetite there is for content in between when matches actually happen, whether that's a team's content, a rights holders content, actually just people engaging with the game, or actual players. Like there's so much of that is extremely valuable to brands and something that sports wishes they had. And like that's the metric I want to be able to show, because I think esports is going to be like this high compared to just about everything else. But
Nicole,
that'll
not,
be hard.
not to kind of use like a bad word here, but do you think that's because esports have been more successful as positioning themselves as lifestyle brands versus traditional sports? Because sort of what you're explaining there in that example is like football, it's about the games, right? It's a competitive brand. So like you care when there's a game about to happen, when there's a game and the game finished. But you're not then identifying yourself as a football fan Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You're waiting until the next game, because what you really are is you're there for the competition, right? Whereas with esports, what you're saying is if it's really a more steady touch point, that's consistent with how people interact with lifestyle brands, because they're a lifestyle. There's something you check in every day because they represent who you are, or at least they hold a piece of your identity. Do you think that's a fair characterization, or am I being one of those bad esports people who's trying to characterize the industry as lifestyle when it's not?
So here's what I'd say. I like the word identity in that. I don't like the word lifestyle, and mostly because I feel like lifestyle is such a buzzword right now. It's like everyone's trying to be a lifestyle brand. But
the business of esports is a lifestyle brand, to be clear.
So we're a lifestyle brand.
Buy the merch. Buy the merch.
That's it.
I mean, that's obvious.
That's
you guys have already conquered that. I'm talking about all the others. No, but I think identity is a really good way of putting it or framing it. And I think a lot of that comes down to how, like, the number one reason that people become esports fans is because they love playing whatever game it is, right? And like, so that is actually their true passion. And esports is, for most, not for all, right? But in esports is a way to express that passion and engage with something that's related to something else that you love. And when it's that constant, you're always following it. It's back and forth. And then you go and play the game and yourself. And then you check back in to, watch someone else play the game. And there's such a great kind of connection of just how people spend their time, and then how content that's coming from esports ties so closely into that I think that has a lot to do with it. And I just think, live streaming and the ability to interact so closely with the esport athletes that just creates so much more engagement and people wanting to kind of tune in than anyone can get in sport. So that's another huge part of it.
I think it's a brilliant idea. Technically, it feels possible. Someone's going to do it.
I feel like it's possible for Team Liquid has created Liquid Plus, and that's super smart because they can start to tie together and have this kind of unique identifier for someone, and then understand all the different ways that they interact, right? But they will only have that for Team Liquid. So
that's what I was going to say. Some of these data points are black boxes, right?
Yes. And then you get back to, well, that's just the industry measuring itself, which is where we were 5 years ago, right? So it really has to be, in my opinion, it has to be an individual-based metric. Like, it's almost impossible to aggregate at a platform level without having really great data science modeling on a team level of overlap across all these different platforms. So it has to be kind of you have to aggregate individual fans' data and then pull that all together, which is a lot, but is actually closer to YouGov's model of how we do things with our panelists and some of the cool things we can do to kind of collect and really allow them to own and permission their data. So if anyone can, I think a lot of what we have in our roadmap in terms of growth and kind of, how we are, working in a post-cookie GDPR world, there's some cool stuff coming up that, I don't know, it's still hard, but could get us there-ish.
I guess I'm curious, Nicole, what, as someone who's been following data trends, looking at the hard numbers in the industry for years now, what are some of the big trends that you've seen? How have things evolved in your mind, big picture? Anything that stands out for you that would be, particularly interesting for our audience?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think one of the first things that, and maybe because we're probably talking to an audience that is knowledgeable of esports, but that continues to just kind of surprise me even in looking at the data is, we think about esports has been growing really fast. And if we're here in the US, we kind of think about what that trajectory was, in the US and when it started and, how that's evolved as new leagues have popped up and things like that. But the trajectory for how esports is growing is so different across like every market, every region in the world. And I think that sometimes we overgeneralize and just say esports and think about just Twitch. And, there's so many of these different kind of nascent places where esports or streamers are popping up that it's going to take a little while for those to build. They're not as far along, but that's going to be really interesting because they're kind of evolving in this ecosystem where part of the industry is really, has really kind of grown and advanced quickly and is at a very different place. So they're kind of like partially playing in that, but also forging their own path. Like I just find all the different nuance across different markets. Southeast Asia is like super fascinating to me to see like, okay, in Malaysia, a game could be super hot and then like no one's playing it in Vietnam. Like everyone just lumps Southeast Asia together, right? But there's so much nuance at who's playing what at a very granular country level. That's something that I just kind of continue to look for and that we're trying to build comparable data across, as many markets as we possibly can to be able to start to bring more of that to life for brands.
Is that something that's specific to esports or something that you saw as well? I mean, dog food notwithstanding, but in other areas of data in your experience. I'm just curious. Oh, William, please.
Actually, Nicole, I want you to include dog food.
I'm just curious.
Dog food's the same everywhere. Let me just.
My dog's answer to all those questions would be, "It's delicious." So
Yeah.
I definitely know that. But I'm just curious. Yeah. I'm just curious. As you're developing these processes and understanding data across various demographics or what have you. Is this something that is specific to esports, something that you think is catching up to data from other industries? Do you think that esports might set the trend for how data is interpreted and looked at in other industries? I kind of want to explore that a little further. And I'm just curious, obviously, from your perspective.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think in some ways, esports is still playing a lot of catch up with that stuff. Though I will say one place where it just naturally has to be this way for esports. I think esports does a better job of kind of having aggregated global views on things. Like if you look at data that's out there about the NBA or the NFL, like 95% of what you find is going to be US only. It's very kind of market specific. And we know that all those organizations are looking to expand their footprint into other areas and markets. And like the data is not nearly as rich there. But esports, one of the things I loved about coming to YouGov was we've got panels in 35 plus markets. Like we can look at how esports is everywhere. And really for esports, you need to, we work with, as you mentioned on the call last week, we work with Riot. Like when they're selling for Worlds and they're selling a big partnership, they need to be able to prove that it's truly, it's truly a Worlds caliber partnership, that these are all the different places that you're going to hit engagement with their fans. So that's just kind of a necessity for esports, which is cool because data has just already from ground up started as more global, whereas sports is really trying to catch up there. But I think in other ways, esports is definitely still catching up. And one challenge that even we face, I think anyone doing challenge or research in esports is facing, is just getting a hold of people. Like that kind of traditional old school, you do like an online survey. It's not what males 18 to 34 are like sitting down hoping to do every night, right? So we have to kind of think about some really unique ways to reach them and keep them engaged when they are in our panel. And so that just kind of creates a bit of a challenge. I think that's actually why some of the data in the space has been so slow to develop overall.
What would you say, Nicole, if you looked, the Riot thing was just so fascinating. Our audience loved it, by the way.
Good.
Riot being a client of YouGov and using your data. I mean, this is, I would call this maybe the best company in all of esports, right? Says a lot about YouGov, I think. What sort of piece of data, what have you seen, and maybe it's from that report, because I know for me it was, but what have you seen recently that stands out for you, that maybe opened your eyes, surprised you, something that maybe will surprise our audience, something that has been pulled from YouGov data, over the last year or so, and that has shocked you? Because I know the way YouGov data works, and the way these data sets work is you guys can pull all kinds of sort of intersection of things. But was there anything that you pulled, a report for a client or something that just shocked you?
Oh gosh, that's a good one. I'm trying to think. I mean, one that I like, and it's crazy because I'm in the space, living and breathing the data every day, talking to people about, the value of gaming. But we actually just today launched our new teen product called Teen Profiles, where it's teen survey data. And like so I was an integral part of kind of helping to build the product out. And because of that, I got a lot of gaming questions in there. And like the data, I feel like, is even more dramatic than I've been characterizing the trend among teens without having that data, in terms of like how much teens love gaming. Like gaming influencers are the number one type of influencer, followed by teens, like total teens. We're not just talking males, like total teens, like by far, versus music versus sports. Like that's real data, and it's like by a large magnitude, right? So I think that like the teen data set we have now, and just like what keeps popping up in terms of gaming just shooting way above everything, just to me, people keep asking, is this a trend? With gaming, did COVID kind of artificially boost it? With esports, is it dying? And I'm like, the appetite for this industry among the youth is just incredible. And like, that's what gives me all the faith in the world that it's going to grow.
I want to go back to that point, because that's a little crazy. Does that mean, so it's fair to say then that the number one taste making industry for teens is gaming?
Number one taste making industry.
Like, is that a fair way of like, because if you're saying basically like teens care more about gaming influencers in aggregate than anything else, and I kind of think the only role of influencers is to influence, right? Like, does that mean, I mean, maybe that's a simplification, but like, I mean, it's in the name, does that mean that like, because I see this anecdotally, like one thing I felt in my lifetime has been the rise of things William likes. Like, it used to be like, oh, you're so lame.
I'm sure there's a YouGov data set for this.
Yeah. Things William likes. Like, oh, it used to be
or the William trajectory. I can imagine the graph right now. Yeah.
But like, seriously, I feel this like, I mean, the most obvious thing to me is Marvel movies. Like, it used to be like, oh, you like comic books, that's so lame. And now it's like, oh my God, every tentpole event ever in any industry is a comic book thing.
Yeah.
So like, is it, I'm kind of digging into, like, obviously is extrapolating this, back to the next generation. Does this mean that games are going to be their taste making moment, right? Like that games are going to dictate how the next 20 years of pop culture evolve, because it's those influencers today who are most effective in reaching, the next generation?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure, because of how fast everything moves these days, that I could, with certainty say that 20 years out. But just looking at, if you look at that same data point trended across different age groups, and if you look at like incidence rate, like to me, it's not just everyone loves gaming when they're young and then it goes off. Like there's a very clear, much broader group with each generation is being pulled into gaming and using it for multiple purposes too, which I think is the other big thing. It's not just you game after you finish your homework and go to bed. You're gaming to talk to people. You're gaming to attend concerts. All these things where it's becoming just much more than your standard kind of singular one person hanging out pastime. It's enveloping so much more of people's lives, including watching gaming related content, right? Which you don't even have to play a game to be able to do. And that's a huge part of our culture now too.
Guys, I don't know if you had any other questions, but I wanted to, William, go ahead.
I have one more, and
Yeah.
Paul and Jimmy don't know I'm going to ask this, but I have a
Yeah.
special
Well,
request.
and neither do I, obviously.
Yeah. I have a special request for a live stream data set. The Heroes of the Storm comparable universe. I think our audience would be thrilled for me to talk for 10 minutes about Heroes of the Storm stacks up. So just a small ask. I know, guys, it's the reason to attend the live stream. If we have it, it'll be a great event. So
I will pull all the data I have for you and just let you get nuts.
If anyone has data on love around Heroes of the Storm, it's going to be YouGov. But somehow I don't know how many people, William, are going to relate to this segment.
brilliant game. It's the best game ever made.
Jimmy, I don't know if you had anything, but I wanted to jump into some news. Did you have anything before we flip into some news here?
No, let's jump into it. That sounds great.
Let me bring up the first story this week. Actually, probably maybe the only story we're going to get to this week, as is always the case with fantastic guests on the podcast. But the first story here is, and we picked this specifically because I wanted to talk about partnerships in the esports world, and this is a story talking about ESL Gaming and Monster Energy. So ESL Gaming adding Monster Energy as a global partner. Obviously, it's a sponsorship. Monster Energy is going to be sponsoring ESL Gaming and their tournaments, the Intel Extreme Masters, ESL Pro Tour, all of the CS:GO events, etc. Dota 2. Nicole, my question for you, and I know you have unique insight here, right? Monster Energy owned by Coca-Cola, client of YouGov. I'm curious, we see these kinds of sponsorships in esports happening every single week. What does a Monster Energy, like when they come to you, what is a brand like that really looking for from you typically?
Yeah, so I think, and I won't comment too much on whether this happened or not exactly for this particular deal, because I want to be sensitive to things, but just generally speaking, I think on one side, it's very much, Monster is obviously very active in tons of different sponsorships in sport, but also esports. They're, a very long-standing partner of Evil Geniuses and TL. And so one of the big things that a company like that wants to look at when they're adding to their portfolio is like, who can we partner with that is actually going to increase our sphere of reach and influence and talk to people that we're not already talking to? We spend a ton of money in sponsorship across everything. So where is there still a gap where, a competitor isn't already owning the space, like a Red Bull or a G Fuel or Game Fuel, that are actually going to be incremental and beneficial for us. And that's where, clients like them, they have, if we have access to like full data, what we call our profiles data set, where you can literally look at a group of individuals. So let's say it's Monster fans, or let's say it's Evil Geniuses fans, and you can start to layer on, okay, what's the incremental reach if you add IEM fans to that? What's the incremental reach if you add, ESL Pro League? Like, start to look at, okay, for each, and they'll know on their end what the investment associated with that is, right? But you can start to see like, okay, is this actually going to give us enough incrementality to make it worth our while? So that's one really big thing. And then for a company like Monster, and there's, tons of these like bigger brands out there in the esports and sports sponsorship ecosystem, people know who they are. Like, they have really broad, strong awareness. And so what they're looking at is what other places a partnership like this can really move the needle. So we have a tool called Brand Index that tracks 16 different KPIs on a daily basis for a brand. And it kind of, if you have any marketing background, it's that classic purchase funnel, right? Of kind of going from awareness all the way down to consideration, purchase interest, satisfaction, all that good stuff. So what a brand like that wants to know is, okay, where can we lean into this partnership to increase some of those lower funnel metrics and KPIs? And then we help track that. So then you can start to see, okay, let's start looking at impression of your brand among fans of, at least one of ESL's events or leagues, and look at how that changes over time. So it's really kind of, equal parts prospecting as well as looking at the effectiveness.
I'm curious. It's a question I ask almost every guest these days, but there seems to be an education gap still. I think a lot of people still feel there's an education gap with brands, a knowledge gap around the space. How many, specific to Monster, and it doesn't have to be specific to Monster Energy here, but how many brands sort of come to YouGov and you feel either have, like, on one hand, no knowledge and are looking to you to really guide them with the data, or are coming to you with a very specific question and a very specific sort of ask, and they're looking to sort of back up maybe a hypothesis with the data?
Yeah, it's still a really healthy mix. We see both in esports, and it's become more of a mix over time. I would say, 3 years ago when I was at Nielsen, it was much more of like, all right, help us figure out what we're doing and just understanding who the different players are and what our opportunities are from an asset standpoint and things like that. I think that education curve has improved and happened, especially with, a lot of brands are working through agencies on deals now. And so you have specialists at agencies who are helping to kind of lead them through, groom the list of proposals they have down to what really is a, better fit for them, that sort of thing. So I think it's definitely a mix of both. I think the question that probably we get most commonly from like brands that we already work with and then new brands coming to us is like, can we actually measure how well this is doing? I think there's still this kind of stigma, like any conference I go to, people are still saying like, we don't have enough data in esports. We don't have enough data. And of course, from my point of view, I'll always feel like we don't have enough data in esports, but we have a lot more data in esports than we had 3 years ago. So a lot of my education kind of is now moved more toward, okay, here's all the different ways that you can track and measure success. First of all, we have to figure out what success looks like for you. You spent this money, like what do you want? What's your goal that you're actually trying to get out of it? And then let's set up a research program or tracking methodology to be able to very specifically track against that and do it not just now and then at the end of your partnership, but continuously, so that if something doesn't seem like it's working, like you can use the data to mid-course, try to check in with your partner and figure things out. So I think that's like now the most consistent place that people need help is just figuring out like what's the right way to prove at the end of the day to senior leadership that the partnership was a smart one.
Mm-hmm. William, Jimmy, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on this partnership specifically, the ESL Monster one. I mean, William, I kind of had a question for you as someone who's, I would call the Book of Esports part like history of the business of esports also. Mm-hmm. But I'm just curious your general thought on like how energy drinks have fit into the ecosystem, how integral you think it's been to the growth of esports.
Well, it's tough because, and Nicole, I want you're going to be able to weigh in much more than, I am on this because you might have some numbers, behind this. But, generally, I think, look, energy drinks were one of the first class of sponsors to come into the space, probably because their brands revolve around being edgier, hipper, more current, right? And so they always benefit a little from being on the cutting edge. You're not seeing Monster advertised at golf, right? They want to be perceived as current. Yeah, well, actually, maybe they should look at that. Like, I don't know. Certainly might help the golfers. And let's be honest, in the early days of esports, sponsorship dollars were thin. And the ability for a team to land a significant sponsorship from a CPG company like energy drinks, which have real marketing budgets to throw around, right, was actually very important in terms of catalyzing the formation of early teams, which is probably why I think we think some of these early moving sponsors are so important to the space. It's not just because they were first, it's because they were actually really important to the people they were sponsoring. And they reflected that back into the amount of effort and honestly, the amount of gratitude, like genuine gratitude in the promotion that was given to the brands because it was very important, right? Mm-hmm. Flash forward to today, we're like, Toyota is here, Louis Vuitton is here, right? Like there's a lot more dollars entering the space and it's no longer oh my gosh, you're a major international brand who wants to work with us, let's talk, right? There's actually, I think, some choosiness on the side of the teams now too, and the sponsorable activities, because they recognize their brands are standing for certain things. And you know what? Like maybe, and maybe Louis Vuitton isn't the right partner, maybe McDonald's isn't the right partner, maybe we want our brand to be more upmarket or down market, So I think in general, the role energy drinks play today is significantly diminished from where they were before. But I think there's a real legacy mindset because, like I said, they were one of the first people whose money helped shape the space. I don't know if you agree with that, Nicole, or you want to throw anything else out there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all that. I think I'd like to, we were chatting earlier, I mentioned I like to basically call energy drinks semi-endemics in esports at this point. They were so integral at the beginning, but they're also still some of the most engaged partners when you look at what they're doing ongoing and being present at events. And like it's not just that they've kind of put their name on esports, associated it, and then continue to let the partnership roll. Like they are still some of the best partners for a lot of the clients that we work with. And so I think they don't have the hurdle, even if it's a new drink coming in, which we know there have been, Mountain Dew's new brand just came out, a year, 2 years ago, and now they're in Call of Duty. And so like that industry does not have to jump over the hurdle anymore of do they belong. But it's more about, kind of, so then it becomes more of what kind of value are they adding to the organization. And I think, luckily they've, these brands have all kind of proven that. And the nice thing is, I mean, certainly just from a pure data perspective, esports fans drink a lot of different beverages, but in terms of kind of comparing them to a general population, they do over-index on, energy drinks, right? And I think that's both an age and demographic thing, as well as, maybe to a slightly lesser extent, kind of that occasion thing. But even just looking at like this partnership as an example, I'm looking at ESL fans. This is like in our data. So fans are followers of at least one major ESL global event or league versus just generic esports fans. And ESL fans are 39% more likely to drink energy drinks than your average esports fan, who is more likely than your average person to drink energy drinks, right? So there's also kind of that, they have the kind of permission to play anywhere, but that doesn't mean that they have to. They can still be really choosy, and data seems to suggest that, it's definitely a good fit with ESL's audience. It looks like even a slight, specifically on the Monster brand, also an over-index, about 11-ish% versus general esports fans of just current consumption of Monster. But I think then Monster, just kind of projecting on all this, the opportunity is then, okay, if we're 39% more likely, if ESL's fans are 39% more likely to consume energy drinks, but only 11% more likely to consume our brand, let's get there and let's use them to own that part of the audience, right? So sometimes a number like that isn't necessarily a bad thing. That shows where the opportunity is and gives you a goal to reach for. So now I'm excited to follow this ongoing.
I mean, it's fascinating, right? So they over-index not just as esports fans, but also as fans of ESL events.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
specifically more than the average esports fan.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which means there are unique characteristics to an ESL fan that is different from the average fan.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, like, that was 3 years ago at Nielsen when I looked at all the data that's out there on general esports fans. Like, that's why I wanted to build something that went to that level, right? Like that's a very meaningful number and much more meaningful than just saying general esports fans for an ESL. So that's, and not every, to the question you asked earlier, Paul, there's probably going to be some teams or, orgs or titles where they under index, and like, okay, that's not bad, but don't go to energy drink. Like then that means maybe, you can, there's 4,000 other brand categories you can go to instead, kind of thing, right? So it just helps to give a lot more guidance when you can get to that level.
I'm not sure where I land with this data, because I got to say in the last 6 months, I've probably had 6 different brands of energy drinks a dozen times, only because I read headlines like this ESL Monster pairing, and I'm like, I've never had that. I got to try it. Or like you said, Mountain Dews in energy. There's a LeBron commercial. Yeah, like get it at the market. So I hope I'm not ruining your studies anywhere. But
no, so you are increasing that like current customer number at least for that first month, and then they have to figure out how to keep you around. So
yeah, yes, they do.
No, but the fact that this data even exists, look, I'll wrap on this, guys. The fact that this kind of data even exists in this level of nuance to me is like, I don't know how there aren't, how every brand is not already working with you guys. Nicole is not already working with YouGov. Like when you can have that level of nuance in terms of figuring out what audience you need to be reaching, to me, it's incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful.
thank you,
Guys, before we wrap up this week's podcast, just first, actually, before I wrap up this week's podcast, Nicole, thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me.
How can people reach you if you want to be reached, or follow you, or find more info about YouGov? Where can they find information about you or YouGov?
Yeah, so myself, I'm definitely most active on LinkedIn, including sharing more data. So find me there, Nicole Pike. I think my URL is technically Nicole Pike Esports. And then YouGov, we are online on all your normal channels. So any social media, we're just going to be at YouGov. We have a website. If you want to look specifically, there's a B2B portion of our website. So YouGov does, we are both a consumer surveying company and a business services company. So you go to our website and you can sign up for our panel, or you can come and look at, all the great things we have to offer from a data standpoint. So check us out there.
I will just mention to our podcast audience that we do a little YouGov Insights segment every week on the live stream. So come check that out, where we highlight data from YouGov. And there's a bunch of like really incredible free research reports at yougov.com/gaming-esports. So definitely everyone
URL. That's
there
even
you go. Everyone listening to the podcast should definitely go check that out, because there's some really fascinating stuff in there. And I know we have a lot of brands who follow us, and there's a lot of data in there that I think is extremely valuable. Also, just a quick reminder, guys, every Wednesday evening, 8:30 p.m., the live stream. And if you haven't already, go leave a review on the Book of Esports on Amazon. Go show William some love. Nicole, thank you so much. William, Jimmy, as always, thank you guys. And we will see everyone next week.